It's just 1 month until Shadow of the Erdtree drops and we are hyped. Elden Ring's DLC is adding a whole new map, more weapons than you can shake a bloody finger at, and at least 10 new bosses to hand us our asses in whole new ways in the lands between. But Elden Ring's a big game and there's quite a lot of stuff players have to do, or should do, if they're going to get the best out of the Shadow of the Erdtree and be ready for everything the DLC will throw at us. With that in mind, we've put together a little bit of advice on how you can prepare for Elden Ring's one and only DLC drop and make sure you're not caught out come June 21st. Let's get into it. First and foremost, and I cannot stress this enough, play the base game before the DLC drops. It's easy to assume that if you've beaten the game before and are on your 2nd or 10th New Game Plus playthrough, that you'll drop right back into the mechanics and be able to jump straight into the new boss fights, but that'd be a mistake. FromSoft aren't likely to be pulling their punches in Shadow of the Erdtree. Let's not forget that this is the same dev that put the Orphan of Kos into the Bloodborne Old Hunters DLC. You don't want to have rusty mechanics on day 1 of diving into whatever hellscape FromSoft have been cooking up. In the same vein, if you're set on giving the DLC a run on a completed or semi-completed game file, make sure you're at least level 100 to 150 before you grab Michaela's hand and get pulled dome first into the DLC. That might seem irrelevant given that game director Hidetaka Miyazaki said that in addition to the normal rune-based leveling system we all know and love, you'll also have a Sekiro-like attack power stat unique to the DLC areas that dictates basically how hard you hit big bosses in the area. Seemingly, it's designed to stop max level players from steaming through every challenge the DLC has, but your base level is still important. Partly because you'll struggle to beat Mog, Lord of Blood, if you aren't that level anyway, but it also means at the very least you should have a decent Vigor stat to eat hits, and have built up some hopefully reasonable defences, which will be the most important thing going into the DLC, with your attack power and damage output apparently on the nerfing chopping block. Which leads nicely into my next point. You have to defeat 2 main Shardbearer bosses to access the DLC. Starscourge Radahn and Mog Lord of Blood. The last one, especially, can admittedly be a bit of a roadblock, but if you stick to my leveling advice, he shouldn't give you too much trouble, especially if you run a bleed build and fight blood with even more blood. It seems you access the Shadowlands map of the DLC through the Mogwai Palace, so as long as these 2 demigods are dealt with, you'll have access to the DLC as soon as it becomes available. So that covers your basics, but there's plenty of items you're going to want to make sure you find if you haven't grabbed them on your playthrough yet, or stockpile to make sure you get the best out of the new DLC weapons and have the best chance of staying alive when a new boss whips out their unreadable, delayed one-shot combo 2 steps through the fog door. Your number 1 priority should be to stockpile smithing stones and somber smithing stones for those sweet, sweet DLC weapons. We still don't know much about the new weapons, short of what's been teased by Miyazaki, but we do know a little bit. The Adachi as a great sword version of the katanas, dueling shields, throwing daggers, and even your tarnished own 2 hands in the form of martial arts, although presumably with some kind of wraps that inflict holy damage or something like that. But even those very brief teases have got us excited about what's coming, and you'd better believe we're going to need to level the hell out of them if we even want to make a dent on the new boss fights. Obviously, it's a lot easier to buy these upgrading materials than hunting down specific versions of smithing stones, so if you haven't already, my next recommendation would be going after each of the Miner's Bell Bearings. These can be used at the Twin Maiden Husks at the Round Table Hold to buy unlimited smithing stones for each type. There are 5 regular smithing bearings and 4 somber bearings to collect, and they do take a bit of work to get them all, but if you're playing to get your groove back before the DLC drops, then taking on the bosses that drop them will be a decent warm-up. To fully upgrade your regular weapons to plus 25 or your special weapons to plus 10, you'll need Ancient Dragon Smithing Stones, and sadly there is a limited number of those per playthrough, but since there are DLC weapons that will require them to upgrade, chances are FromSoft will throw us a bone and give us a few more to use on them, right? From there, you do well to clear up any of the talismans that you've missed on the playthrough you're taking into the DLC. Obviously, what talismans you favour will depend heavily on your build, but for general purposes, ones that boost your HP and FP will be especially useful given the switch to the attack power focused Sekiro style level system we mentioned earlier. The Assassin's Cerulean and Crimson daggers both restore either HP or FP when you successfully hit a critical hit. The Crimson dagger can be found in West Limgrave's Death-Touched Catacombs, while the Cerulean dagger is in Liurnia's Black Knife Catacombs. But since you can land critical hits on normal enemies relatively easily, they're pretty useful to have in your arsenal. The Ancestral Spirit's Horn or the Taker's Cameo both restore either HP or FP when you defeat an enemy, including even animals. So they're particularly useful if you find yourself running low while you're out in the open world. Ancestral Spirit's Horn can be exchanged for the Regal Ancestor's Remembrance after defeating it in Nokron, and the Taker's Cameo is awarded by Tanith Smith at the Volcano Manor. That said, anything defensive that boosts your survivability will almost certainly be a useful addition when we hit the DLC. You'll also want to get to work stacking up on larval tears, the resource Elden Ring uses to respec your characters. With new weapons and new spells being added to the game, and with every boss having the potential to be millennia levels of difficult with their own unique strengths and weaknesses, adapting your build is probably more important than it's ever been in the base game. It's not yet clear if the DLC will help by introducing other ways to respec. Larval tears can be tricky to find, so it would definitely be helpful, but since when has that ever been a factor with FromSoft? So a word of advice, if you're running low, make sure you seek out the Wandering Merchant in the Siofra River and Pidia in Carrier Manor to stock up, or hunt down some of the mimics scattered across the lands between disguised as ordinary enemies, like the Wandering Noble in West Limgrave that turns into a rune bear, or the Wandering Noble in Caelid that turns into a troll. There are plenty of them, so go out there and get hunting. Beyond that, the last piece of advice is fairly obvious. Hoard as many runes as you can so you never get caught short when you meet a new merchant in the Shadowlands that just so happens to be selling that new weapon or spell you've been looking for. Of course, you could ignore all of this advice and just start an entirely new game. FromSoft have confirmed the DLC is completely standalone from the base game, so whatever happens in the Shadowlands doesn't impact on your adventure in the lands between. And to be fair, playing from the first step all the way to the Mogwai Palace would at least mean we get plenty of practice in, and honestly, I think we might need it. Thanks for watching. Drop this video a like if you found it useful. Let us know what you're doing to prep for the DLC down in the comments, and while you're here with us, YouTube is recommending the perfect video just for you, so check that out right here.